Hi, let's go and understand how exactly business object oriented modeling is done. So, in this unit, I'm going to take you step by step through the individual processes and individual artifacts that one needs to produce uh, as you model your solution. So, the first thing we need to understand is interviews. That is the step one. So, interviews are a must across the phases. You will be conducting interviews very often. And in iterative processes, interviews are conducted in each phase. In waterfall, maybe you'll be conducting only in the beginning and not so much in the later parts. So, as a PM, you will carry out interviews with users at various phases of a project. During the initial phase, you will interview stakeholders in order to establish the business rationale and scope for the project and to collect initial requirements. During the discovery phase and on iterative projects during the development phase as well, you will meet with users to discover and document the business requirements for the new or the revised software system. As you gather the requirements in these phases, you will hold review sessions with stakeholders to verify the correctness and completeness of the requirements documentation. During the final V&V phase, which if you remember, verification and validation phase, you will meet with stakeholders to validate that the software meets their requirements. The table here describes different interview formats and when each type is used during the project lifecycle. Please note that on an iterative project, any interview type associated in the table with the discovery phase is also used during the development phase, since requirements analysis continues as the solution is developed in iterative uh, processes, right? So I have tried to make it as easy as possible for you, with which formats are suitable for which scenarios, what's their benefit and what's their disadvantages. Uh, Please make a note of this. Moving along, the step one of a modeling process is essentially initiation. So during the initiation phase, the project grows from an idea in someone's mind into a bare bones proposal that outlines the main aspects of the project and describes the main reasons for pursuing it. During this phase, your job as a business analyst is to identify and analyze the business requirements for the project. Understand that at this phase, you are kind of working like a business analyst and you're trying to understand how the business is working, what are the different inputs and outputs. So essentially, you're wearing the hat of a business analyst at this point. You will identify high level business goals as business use cases. You will be working with stakeholders to analyze stakeholder participation using business use case diagrams, and you will communicate to stakeholders an emerging consensus regarding the workflow using activity diagrams. We'll be covering activity diagrams once again very soon. So, how long does the initiation phase take? Well, it could be a few days work to consider if it's worth during essentially what you're looking for is um, you should be doing few days of work to consider if it's worth doing a few months work of deeper investigation. For larger projects it can take few months, but essentially you are trying to figure out as soon as possible that should we invest our time in doing this project or not. So what are the deliverables of this initiation step? Well, you start off with a PRD. Okay, so as you work through the boom steps, which is BOOM, you will use a single document, the business requirement document or a PRD, to describe business requirements throughout the project lifecycle. You begin working on the PRD during the initiation phase. Different organizations handle this document in very different ways. The PRD may be a single living document or a requirements package that resides as separate components that are assembled in different ways for different audiences. So think of it like this: that there are different components within a PRD. Now, depending on whether you're speaking to developers or you're speaking to designers or to CEO or to the customers, you will assemble or you will use the right components within that PRD to represent what you're building. So some other names for this documentation produced during the initiation phase. So instead of PRD, it is also called, for example, product vision and scope, or project vision and scope, or opportunity evaluation, whatever the term is. Essentially, the first document kind of sets out the tone for the entire project. Okay, so we'll set up, you will end up doing building a business use case description. You'll create a role map as to who are the stakeholders, what are their roles, the system use case diagram, the initial class diagram. You'll create all of these, or just nothing at all, depending on what you're working on, right? So you will model the business use cases, where you'll identify the business use cases and scope the business use cases. In the brackets, I've mentioned the exact diagrams that you should be creating. Then you should be creating a system use case, which is identify the actors, identify the system use case packages, and identify system use cases, right? Then you should start with structural modeling. So you should create some sort of a class diagram to identify what are the classes, what are the objects involved, and finally set baseline for the discovery. So as to, you can come back once the entire process is done. You can come back and see where did you start from and what was the output expected at the initial stages, right? So just to repeat, you will be in the first step. The first part of the first step, you will be modeling the business use cases. You will be identifying business use cases, and you'll be scoping them. Okay, so let's explore that, right? So the 1A, which is model business use cases, how you do that is essentially, in your first meetings with stakeholders, you want to identify the end-to-end business processes that the product that you're building will affect. These processes are business use cases. A business use case is a business process representing a specific workflow in the business, an interaction that a stakeholder has with the business that achieves a business goal. It may involve both manual and automated processes and may take place over an extended period of time. Any product has the potential to change the business environment. How steps, both manual and automated, within a business are performed, and the roles and responsibilities of employees. By focusing on business use cases at the outset of the product, you ensure that this business perspective is not forgotten, right? You will typically be using business use case diagrams to represent your learnings during this step, right? What are these business use case diagrams? They look kind of like this. There's a business use case, and there's an actor, and then there's a worker, and then the association. Now you can go to this degree and you can create these diagrams. I personally prefer diagrams like this because they're visual and it's much more easy to understand. Or you can simply you can simply write down the associations, exactly what is being conveyed in this diagram, into textual format, whatever works for you. I'll recommend using diagrams, but it's up to you, right? So business actor is typically someone external to the business, such as a customer or supplier. The worker is someone who works within the business, such as an employee or a customer service representative. An association between an actor and a business use case indicates that the actor interacts with the business over the course of the business use case, right? For example, by initiating the use case or by carrying it out. Let's move along. So after creating the business use case diagram, you can create an activity diagram. In my opinion, activity diagram is one of the most useful diagrams in general to depict and understand workflows. So diagrams for depicting workflow, you have essentially four different kind of diagrams. You have system flow chart, you have swim lane workflow diagram, you have sequence diagram, you have activity diagram. I personally prefer activity diagram a lot. So activity diagrams very clearly identify what's happening throughout the flow. Okay, and there's something, as you can clearly see, this is something which your developers will absolutely love you for, because it they don't have to go through a thick document. They can simply go through the flow and they exactly know what rules and what workflows they have to design for, right? So now that you have a business use case diagram that matches up stakeholders with business processes, you can begin to plan the next stage of the interviews. Each interview should focus on a subset of the business use cases. Be sure to invite all stakeholders associated with the use case, okay, as well as off-stage stakeholders, those who do not directly interact with the process but still have a stake in it. such as regulators and high level management. Okay. The purpose of these interviews is to analyze the workflow of each business use case. Workflow means the sequencing of activities and optionally a clear designation of who carries out each activity. Okay. Both of them are important, the sequence as well as who is going to do that activity, right? So for example, there's an activity which requires approval of somebody, then you need to know that the executive can do this activity provided the permission is given by somebody else, right? And if the person doesn't, if the executive doesn't do the activity in a certain period of time, then maybe the role map, maybe the manager should be intimated as soon as possible, right? So the workflow can be documented in text and or through the use of a workflow diagram. The business facade, the interaction between the business area and the entities outside of it, is best described in text. Okay. If you're analyzing business use cases for the broad purpose of improving the business process, you may want to use a formal template for documenting the interaction. While if you're analyzing business use cases only as a means to an end, the end being the system use cases, then an informal text description will probably suffice, right? So this is the most common situation we are presuming, that you'll be using it, just you will be using the business use cases, etc., only as a means to an end. Okay. In either case, if the workflow for the interaction is too complex to describe clearly in text, append the text with an activity diagram. If things are very simple, just use text. But if the things are a little more complex and there are too many rules and description that you would like to provide, then prefer to keep a activity diagram along with it. To document the internal process used to carry out the business use case, use an activity diagram with partitions. Okay, partitions, swim lanes. And activity diagrams are UML compliant examples of workflow diagrams. These are UML diagrams and they're compliant with it, right? Uh, the next thing I want to talk about is essentially states and essentially activity diagrams with states. Okay. Um, what are states? So objects may be considered to be in various states during their lifetimes, right? So if you imagine an invoice moving through its life cycle, it will have different states at during the entire process, right? So to find out what these states are, simply ask the stakeholders to tell you what statuses they consider a business object to be in. That itself will give you a very good idea, right? So objects may be considered to be in various states during their lifetime. For example, invoices pass through some of the following states: created, due, paid, past 30 days, written off, etc. To find out what these states are, just ask the stakeholders and they will tell you what are the statuses they would like to see in the product. That is a very good starting point, right? And so what makes some changes to a business object important enough to be considered changes of state? Well, the business treats the object differently because of the change. Okay. So how do you, because there will be too many states to track. So how do you determine which one should be tracked and which one should not be tracked? Simply look at when does the change is important enough that the business is going to treat it very differently, right? So for example, there are rules for the sequence in which the object may move in and out of the state, or the object's response to external event differs, right? Something happens and corresponding to that, something else has to happen, right? For example, just look at the figure A. So figure A indicates that the set gathering date activity causes a case to move into the scheduled state, right? So set gathering date, uh, essentially when the this use case, that is set gathering date, is activated, this activity happens, it causes a state of the case being a certain, let's imagine a document or a file, as scheduled. The state of the this case is scheduled now. Okay. This is followed by the convene gathering activity. You can see that set gathering date going to prepare stakeholders, going to convene gathering. After the convene gathering has happened, then the case changes a state to resolved, right? So this makes things dead simple for anybody to understand what's happening. If you convert this entire thing into text, in my opinion, it just makes the entire thing very dense for no good reason, right? So Uh, the important thing to observe here is when you are designing these object flows or these activity diagrams, the object flow is the a dashed line with an open arrowhead, right? This thing. An object flow connects an object to an activity. When the arrow points away from an activity, the object flow indicates that the object or the object state at the tip of the flow is a result of the activity. Okay, it's very simple, but I'm just making sure that you get this. And when the arrow points to an activity, it indicates that the object at the source of the flow is required by input to an activity. Okay. Um, an object may be a source or destination of an object flow or both. One activity diagram may include objects of many classes and different objects of the same class. As well, the same object may appear more than once on an activity diagram, as in figure A. If an activity produces an object as output, and this same object is the input for the next activity, you may omit the control flows between the two activities. In figure B, you can see a control flow between the setup interviews and interview stakeholders activities is not required, right? Because setup interviews produces a new object called case, which is with a state of ready for interviews, and that object is then linked with interview stakeholders. So you don't have to create a separate linking between setup interviews and interview stakeholders. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is activity diagrams with partitions. I just spoke about how you can use swim lanes. So they are useful to indicate who performs each activity, right? So you add partitions to the activity diagram. A partition is depicted as a column or row on an activity diagram. Each partition represents a stakeholder who carries out some activity. Okay, it's very simple and right. So a partition is depicted as a column or a row on an activity diagram. You can choose any one of them. I have used column here. So allocate one partition for each object that takes an active part in the process flow. Each partition represents a stakeholder. It could be a business actor or worker, that is somebody from outside of the entire product or within the business. Although you shouldn't spend too much time focusing on technology at this time, you may also show a computer system as a partition. You know, if you need to talk about a separate system or separate service, then you can just use that or indicate that using a in the partition diagram as well. Then you position every activity in the partition of the object that performs it. Name each partition at the top of the column according to the participating object as shown in the figure. Okay. You may use an informal, simple name for the partition, identifying the actor who carries out the task, for example, problem identifier or any other name. A better approach is to use the more formal form, which is object name and the class name. Okay, that just makes it much simpler. Class name is the name of the role, that is the worker, business actor, or external system that participates in the activities. Object name identifies a specific instance or example of the role. For example, Mr. Dudu, problem identifier. Right, so problem identifier is a class. Mr. Dudu is a specific instance of the class, and that's why Mr. Dudu is an object. Right, so this format is recommended because it allows you to show the participation of more than one instance of the same actor. Right, for example, two different problem identifiers involved in the same business case can be represented very clearly because the object name will differ. Right, the object name in this format is optional, so you can omit it, but don't forget to leave in the column, for example. Right, so I think I'll essentially what you should be doing is you should use the object name and a class name. If you use both of them, then it just makes things much more clearer that Mr. Talvinder, as a problem identifier, will be acting upon this set of activities, right? Which makes it dead simple that what's the role of Talvinder and who is the actual actor in this particular activity, right? So let's move along. Let's now model the system use cases, right? So system use cases are often called just the use cases, or whatever term that. So whenever you say use cases in a very colloquial fashion, That's, you're essentially referring to system use cases. Okay, so this helps you imagine the IT system or the product or the software system that you're talking about. Realize that I'm more often talking about product as an IT system because uh, in most of the large setups or large companies, the products actually become a large IT system itself. They are not, they're not simpler or smaller products anymore, right? So system use cases help you imagine the IT system from a user's perspective by focusing on the user's goal. Okay, and you would want to standardize the common issues of the users here. So you would want to standardize how users are documented, that is a roadmap, and you will break up the user requirements into manageable pieces, which you do by using system use case diagrams, which are very similar to business use case diagrams. I'll just talk about them in a minute, right? So I just want to emphasize on a couple of things. One, if the project is large, you will need to find a way to break up the work so that a number of analysts or product managers can work in parallel. First, you need to standardize common issues so that all team members handle them consistently. Okay. One of these issues is the way that users of the IT system will be documented. Somebody will call a certain class of actors X, and some other product managers might end up using Y, which can cause a lot of confusion, right? So to address these issues, you create a diagram called a role map. And another issue is how to break up the user requirements into manageable pieces. And you'll address this issue with system use case diagram. So basically, set up a ground rule or set up a baseline for how exactly the system should be treated. And that's one of the best practices that a product manager should be doing as soon as they enter a certain new company. Try to understand the exact terminology and clarify anything that might be, they might be talking about the same user but might be using two different terms for it, and that can confuse everything. Your understanding, everybody else is understanding, right? So um, so in this step you identify the IT systems users or actors. Previously, when we spoke of actors, it was in relation to business use case modeling. There we spoke of business actors and workers. From this point onward, however, we are doing system use case modeling and we'll speak simply of actors. An actor in this context is a role played by a person or system that interacts with the product, right? So, an actor is a type of user or an external system that interacts with the system under design. So, whatever you're building right now, an actor is anybody who essentially interacts with the system. It could be an external system, it could be a user, it could be anyone, right? What are the similar terms used for instead of actor? You can also use stakeholder, you can also use external agent, external entity, you can use anything. So how do you find the actors before you model or before you create a role map? You need to find the actors, right? Who are the people who are interacting with my product? So to find actors, go through a list of business actors and workers, eliminating any who don't interact with the IT system, the IT system that you're designing right now, or the product that you're designing right now. Then add any external systems and human users who are required because of the technology, right? Remember that when you performed business use case modeling, your focus was not on technology, right? So you may have missed some of these actors, right? So you, any external system or any external product, any third party API, anything that you would want, you will model it here. And then finally, you will start creating a role map. A role map is a diagram used to standardize the treatment of users and external systems throughout the project. A role map is a restricted form of a use case diagram. Okay. Whereas a use case diagram shows actors and their associations with use cases, the role map shows only actors. It basically puts all the actors involved in the product that you're talking about and creates a map between each one of them. Who gives permission to whom, how exactly they should work out, and so on. Okay. So why should we identify actors and why do it now? Basically, you would want to focus on users' needs, right? And that is why you need to identify who are the users, and that's why you should do it right away. And if a user only receives reports from the system, is that user an actor? Well, there's no right and wrong answer to this. I would treat them as a user, but you can choose to do otherwise. Both are okay. How to handle system use cases that aren't started by anybody, but just start up automatically at a given time. You know, at a given time or a given condition is met and something happens. I will, the way I treat this is simply define an actor called time to act as the initiator of these use cases, right? But then again, this is also a little controversial. If a customer calls in a request and a customer service representative keys it in, which one is the actor? Well, only the actor who directly interacts with the computer system is considered an actor, right? So in this case, it would be the CSR. Okay. The next tricky thing comes in: how do you model actors with overlapping roles, right? So you would use generalization relationship between the actors. Anytime the phrase "a kind of" comes up in the discussion of actors, think about using the generalization relationship. For example, a bookkeeper and an accountant are two kinds of accounting staff. Exactly how you draw the generalization depends on how the roles overlap, right? So we will look at two types of situations: actors whose role partially overlap, and actor whose role completely encompasses another's. Correct. So look at the two examples here. So actors whose role partially overlap, when there is an when two actors have some overlap in their roles, but each actor can do things with the system that the other can't, model the actors as specialized actors and invent an abstract generalized actor to represent the overlap. The term generalized implies that the specialized actors inherit something from the generalized actor. In this case, the specialized actors inherit the ability to do all the things that the generalized actor can do, right? So, formally, what is happening is the specialized actors, the bookkeeper and the accountant, for example, inherits the associations that the generalized one has with the system use cases. So, whatever the accounting staff can do with the system, the bookkeeper and accountant are inheriting. But in general, when you're describing in the PRD and whatever, you can use accounting staff uh, instead of using bookkeeper and accountant frequently, right? Um, and the generalized actor is not a true role, and it can be a true role, it may not be a true role, but essentially most of the scenarios it is just an abstract concept meant to represent the shared aspects of other roles. Okay, I hope this is super clear, right? And the second situation is where the actor whose role totally encompasses another's, right? So there's a customer service rep and there's a customer service manager. So in these cases, an actor might be able to do everything that another actor can do and more. In this situation, model the actor with a restricted role as the generalized actor and model the actor with a larger role as the specialized actor. This may look odd at first since the diagram tends to make the lesser role more important. This is due to the common practice of drawing the generalized actor above the specialized actor. Okay. But in general, there is no rule as to which one should be at the top, which one should be at the bottom. You can do anything, right? But just make sure the generalization symbol still points from the specialized actor to the generalized actor. That's the only important thing here. Okay. And this is a good example of how you can represent. So the arrow points from manager to the rep, right? The generalized actor, the important thing to note here is that the generalized actor in this case is not an invention but a real role, unlike the previous case. It is therefore considered to be a concrete actor. Okay. And what's the point of defining generalized actors? Why should we do this? Well, they simplify the drawing of use case diagrams. Soon you'll be creating use case diagrams that indicate which actors are associated with each use case. If all of the specialized actors of one generalized actor are associated with the same use case, you will be able to draw a single association line between the generalized actor and the use case instead of lines from each of the specialized actors, which will make the entire diagram much more messier, right? Now let's understand this use case packages, the system use case packages. So if your project supports only one business use case, you may proceed directly to the following step, which is identifying the system use cases. Okay, you don't have to create packages. But if it supports a number of business use cases, which is usually the case, consider creating system use case packages. A system use case package is a collection of system use cases and the diagrams that describe it. Okay, why do we do it now? what you're doing essentially is you're creating a filing system that all members of the team will use once the analysis really gets underway, right? What criteria are used to group system use cases into packages? Well, there is no exact criteria, but there are some thumb rules. Okay, so group system use cases by the main actor who uses them. So, for example, group together into one package all the system use cases used by general administration, or let's say by the CEO, or let's say uh, by the by the accounting team. Create a system use case package for each business use case. So, for example, in an insurance system, the customer sees the end-to-end process, make a claim, right? So there's a process called make a claim. To the customer, this represents one business goal, that I want to make a claim. However, to achieve it, the company's workers require a number of discrete interactions with the computer system, right? So there's record the claim, validate policy, adjust claim, pay claim, and so on, right? So you can use either one of them, or any other. You can go creative here, right? The diagram used to represent system use case packages, I'm sorry, is formally a use case diagram. Okay, though it looks a little odd in that it does not depict any actual use cases. You can see the figure here. Essentially, just create a folder, and customer service rep is connecting with card applications. CSR manager is connected with credit app updates, and both of them are connected to verification, right? So I'll not describe the exact direction and everything because I think this is pretty obvious. You can refer the speaker notes if you want to clarify anything. Um, so there's a scenario that I just want to address. So what if a use case package is connected to all of the specialized actors of a generalized actor, right? So connect the package to the generalized actor. Okay, so what is a generalized actor in this case? Bank to bank system is generalized actor, which has verify, CC check, and C creator. I'm sorry for the this spelling mistake. These are the specialized actors, right? So the connect the packaged to the generalized actor. For example, suppose that verify was only one of its number of systems able to verify a person's credit, and that the system under design needed to be able to communicate with all of them. You would indicate that as shown in the figure here. Okay. So a system use case is an interaction between an actor and a computer system. Okay. And the next step is to identify the system use cases that go into the packages. You do this by going back to the business use cases and reviewing the activities they describe. Okay. First, try to determine with stakeholders which of these activities fall within the scope of the product itself. Where things are currently being done manually, you are looking for activities that could be either fully or partially automated by the product that you're building. Where things are being done using product or technology, you are looking for opportunities for improvement, right? So either you're looking to completely automate something which was manual, and at places where there's already the usage of technology in place, then you're looking to improve or figuring out how do you improvise on the current situation. So once you identified the activities, you will need to group them into system use cases. So imagine the system. How will someone sitting at a terminal actually use the system, right? So imagine from that angle. So what result is a user trying to achieve from the computer system, from the product with each interaction? Each of these results expressed as a user goal is a system use case, right? For example, for a web banking system, some system use cases are view transaction history, transfer funds, and pay bill. So what is the purpose of segmenting the user requirements into system use cases? Well, system use cases become the central tool that governs the management of the entire product. With their user perspective, they keep the team focused on the user throughout the project, right? How does that happen? Well, the requirements are written from the user's point of view, correct? So prior to use cases, requirements were often written as a list of capabilities, such as the system must be able to do XYZ. With system use cases, the documentation is instead written as a narrative describing the user's experience using the system, correct? So that's why the system use cases became the central or became so popular. System use cases help ensure that the user receives useful functionality with each release when a project is managed iteratively. With iterative product management, the system is analyzed, designed, coded, and often released in several passes. At each pass, one or more system use cases or selected use case scenarios are developed. Because each system use case achieves a meaningful goal for the user is guaranteed useful functionality at the end of each iteration. System use cases lead to user interfaces that are organized from a user perspective. Most people have had experience with systems that require the user to bounce around screens or a site just to get one unit of work done. This happens because the developers have organized the user interface from their own point of view. When the interface is organized around system use cases, each option presented to the user represents a complete activity from the user's perspective. And lastly, system use cases yield a set of test cases that encompass the ways users use the system. Because a system use case describes the way that an interaction plays out, it is very close to being a test script. And the way the text is typically organized as separate flows makes it easy to identify test scenarios. So let's understand how do you model the system use cases, right? So once you have decided what system use cases are required to support a business use case, right? I'll just pause and just repeat this because this is important, right? So once you have decided what system use cases are required to support a business use case, so you have identified the business use case and then you are identifying the system use cases that are needed to support the business use case, right? So you document your findings in a system use case diagram. So create one or more, if necessary, system use case diagrams for each system use case package. The system use case diagram shows which actors participate in each system use case. The diagram does not show sequencing. You can't tell from the diagram the order in which the system use cases should be used or the sequence of activities within each use case. Okay, to show sequencing, use an activity diagram. So use case is just to put everything together in one place. It doesn't talk about sequencing. The figure shows a system use case diagram. It illustrates the following elements, right? So there's a primary actor, an actor who initiates a use case interaction, right? Secondary actor is an actor that the system initiates an interaction with after the use case has started, correct? uh, and finally the system use case, which is a user task itself, correct? So have a look at the diagram. There's a primary actor, there's an secondary actor, there's a system use case. Okay, so what the diagram is saying here is a CSR or a manager enters credit card application information. A manager may adjudicate a credit card application as well. The system use case, once underway, may involve an interaction with an external computer system, which is the adjudication system. For example, by requesting a maximum allowable credit limit for the customer based on application information and credit history. Right? The system use case may also involve an interaction with a bank customer, for example, by emailing the customer a letter of acceptance or rejection. So, how many primary actors can a use case have? Well, in the situation modeled in figure, either a CSR or a manager can initiate a system use case. Enter credit card application information. That's a system use case, right? In this situation, the practice followed by me is to indicate both as primary actors. The implication being that either the CSR or manager may initiate the interaction. Well, others argue about this against this practice. However, because they would interpret this to mean that both actors are required to initiate this use case, right? So this can also be interpreted that CSR and manager both are required to initiate the activity, the use case, right? In my opinion, you can just mention it in one place that what flow or what process are you following? What is your definition of use of primary actors, right? Also, another interesting thing to consider is what if the manager is acting in a truly separate role, however, as the authorizer of information previously entered during the use case by the CSR. In that case, all practitioners would model the manager as an additional actor for the use case. Whether the actor is primary or secondary depends on who initiates the interaction between the manager and the system. If the system does, for example, by sending a request for approval to the manager, then the manager is a secondary actor. If the manager does, for example, by signing in and selecting the case for review, then the manager is a primary actor. So basically, primary actor is the one who is initiating. That's all that you need to remember, right? I have I've described some more details in the speaker notes. I will suggest that please go through that by yourself. Now that we have done with system use cases, let's begin the structure modeling. Well, structure model is used to describe the structure of a system using classes. How original, right? But essentially, this is if you have an idea about what exactly or how exactly do you want the system to be structured, creating a model is pretty good. It initiates a good discussion among the developers as well as the business stakeholders, right? So here's what the figure means. There's a peace committee which handles a particular case. A case is resolved through peace gatherings. A case generates payments, and a peace committee consists of peace committee members, right? Other information such as the number of payments per case can also be added to the structural model at this stage. But since this is still early in the project, you can expect a lot of changes in this system. And finally, setting the baseline for the discovery, right? So once the initiation phase for the project is over, you need to baseline your analysis. This simply means saving the state of the analysis at this point and putting it under change control, right? So by baselining your documentation, you ensure that if changes are requested later, you'll be able to check whether they represent a change from the original scope of the project or not. Correct? But keep in mind that exception for agile projects, right? Where the requirements are not baselined unless they are under development, right? So you can choose to keep things agile and flexible till pretty late. The analysis up to the point also becomes the starting point for the next phase of the project, which is the discovery phase, right? So to conclude, uh, we have gone through the entire activity diagram, use case diagram, and both the business use cases and system use cases. We understood how both of them are designed. But let me take this moment to explain that all of these diagrams can also be written in textual format. Okay, nothing stops you from doing that. But in my opinion and my experience, wherever possible, try to convert whatever you written into visual formats as well, because visual formats are much easier to grasp. It will be much easier for your developers, designers, and business stakeholders to actually grasp it and respond to it as compared to writing 2 pages to describe the same thing, right? That's it for now. Thank you.